In today's video, we're going to make a slash and insert quilt block using Crumb fabric. Hi, I'm Jamieson-Hirst of Chatterbox Quilts, and today I want to show you how to make these blocks. So they're a slash and insert method. What's made them a little different than what you might usually see is the fact that we're using Crumb fabric as these strips. So let's talk about how to do this. So the first thing you're going to need is some background fabric, if I can get Salem to give it to me. All right. So a couple of components to this. One is the background fabric, and I'm using an 8-inch square here. Now, a bit of a caveat, when you're making these blocks, you want to start with a background fabric that's going to be bigger, at least an inch, maybe even 2 inches, bigger than what you want your finished block size to be, or your, uncut block size before it's going to be finished. So for example, if you want a 9-inch finished block, you'd be cutting it to 9.5. So you might want to start with an 11.5-inch piece of background fabric. Okay, I think you know what I mean, right? So you've got your background fabric, and then you want to have some strips. Now, I'm going to put 2 strips of Crumb fabric in this slash and insert block. You could choose to do just 1. You might want to have 3. The process is the same as you go along. So today we're starting with 2, all right? So if you don't know what Crumb fabric is or how to create this type of fabric, don't worry. I've got a video that explains all about it. You can look up above or in the description below, and I'll put a link in there for you, and you can watch that video, and then you can start using all your scrap fabrics to make Crumb fabric. Lots of different uses for Crumb fabric. All right, so you're also going to need to cut your background fabric. All right, now this is the scariest part, right? Cutting into fabric like this. And there's no right or wrong here there, so you don't need to be that scared, okay? But a few caveats. So I'm going to cut this in half, going from opposite sides. So I'm not going from an adjacent, one side to an adjacent side. I'm going opposite sides. But I want to cut on an angle. So I don't want to cut it straight vertically or straight horizontally, and that would be kind of boring. So I want to do it on a bit of an angle. And when I'm doing that, I want to make sure that I'm not going to be right over close to the edge, because we are going to be stitching this strip of Crumb fabric into it. We're going to have that 1/4 inch seam allowance on both sides of our background square. So we need to give ourselves a bit of breathing space. All right. So keep yourself at least 1/2 inch over or more on, both sides when you go to cut, right? So let's say we cut something like, let's see, about like this. Okay. It looks interesting. Let's do that. Okay. Look, I survived. The world didn't collapse. All right. So here we go. Now we've cut our background fabric. I'm going to work with one piece at a time. So I'm going to work with this piece first. And this is where your Crumb strip comes in handy. Well, it's kind of essential. Not just handy, essential. So I want to make sure that I put this on along the edge of where I cut that background square of fabric, the background fabric. And I want to make sure that my Crumb fabric strip extends above and below, because when we stitch it on with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then we open it up, we want to make sure that when I go to trim it, that I've got enough that I can trim right along the top of that background square. All right. So if, for example, I was going to line this up on my pressing mat, just so you can see what I'm talking about, if I had only put it here, for example, and then I stitched down with a 1/4 inch seam, when I go along here, you can see as I go to do that cut, I'm going to be cutting off, there's not going to be any fabric here where there needs to be, right? So important to have this extending top and bottom, okay? So if you're not sure and you want to double check, you could certainly, pin along, open it up, use your cutting mat, and, make sure that when you open it up again, that if you cut along there, top and bottom, that you are going to have fabric, right? Okay. So I am pretty confident, because I cut this strip fairly long, that I've got enough fabric here. So let's just go something like that. So the next thing I need to do is I need to go to the machine. I need to sew this on with a 1/4 inch seam. So I'm going to do that, come back and show you what it looks like before we move on to the next step. When I'm stitching the Crumb strip to the background fabric, I do it a little differently than how you might normally do it. So normally when we're stitching 2 pieces of fabric together, you would put the narrower one on top. So that would mean putting the Crumb strip on top of the background piece of fabric. But then I can't see the edge of the background fabric, which is really where I want to make sure I'm right on when I go to do this 1/4 inch seam. So I like to flip my fabric over with the background fabric on top and making sure that I'm along there. Sometimes when I'm stitching crumb fabric together, it might be a little bit wonky sometimes. I mean, I try and straighten the edges, but so many seams in there that sometimes it can stretch a little bit. So that's why I like to do this. Flip it over, make sure you're going right along the background fabric when you stitch the two pieces together, and it'll give you a much better result. All right, so now I've got my crumb fabric strip stitched to my background piece of fabric, well, part of it, right? So this is what it looks like. So of course I want to open it up and I want to press it, and I like to press to the background fabric, and the reason I'm doing that is because there are so many seams in here, it's better to press to the background where, you know, there aren't any seams, right? Well, one seam, you know what I mean. All right, so let's do that. And then I'm going to add some easy press here to keep that down. A lot of seams going on there. It's a good idea to use some starch, or I like to use Acorn Precision Piecing Easy Press product. It works so well to keep the seams flat. All right, so this is what we have. All right, so let me move some of my pressing things out of the way because we don't need that. The next thing we need to do is we need to add the remaining piece of our background fabric. So in order to do that, what I want to do is I want to go and I want to line this up. I'm actually going to do it this way so you can see better. I'm going to line up my background fabric along the seam. Okay, this edge for sure. You could line up both edges, right? It should be straight, so you could do that. All right, and then you want to add this piece. Now, it gets a little confusing. It can be a little confusing, but it doesn't have to be. So one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to trim off this excess crumb strip because we are done with him. We do not need that anymore. All right, so there we go. That little dog ear off the background fabric. And then we're going back here again, and I'm going to take my other piece. Now, for me, the challenging part is often making sure that I have this background fabric on the right way, okay? In other words, that I don't end up doing it like this or something, okay? So if it's not looking square-ish, okay, when you line it up, change that piece around, okay? Because you got the wrong orientation. All right, that may just be me. So I've got this here, and I'm looking at this line here on my pressing mat, all right? I want this to be lining up with it, sort of, okay? So I have a 1/4 inch seam that I need to take into account as I do this. So I'm going to try and move this up about 1/4 inch. And what I like to do is I like to actually pin parallel here so that I can give it a check before I actually stitch it, because if I've got it off a bit, it is not going to work out very well, right? So let me just pin some of this down, approximating a 1/4 inch seam. And now I'm going to move this so you can see things a bit better. Okay, so that's not working out right. If it doesn't work out right, it's because I've moved this piece the wrong direction, okay? And I don't really need my pressing mat so much anymore, my cutting mat so much anymore. I had moved it up, I actually need to move it down. So it depends on the angle that you're cutting to insert your strip. I could give you more information than that, but really, it's easiest just to go, you know, if you pin it and it's too high, that's not working out, take it down about 1/4 inch or thereabouts. Might need to be a little bit more. And let's try again. So it's a good idea to always pin first, check it out, see where it's at, and, you know, if you need to take it apart and repin, that's better than having to seam rip, right? Okay, so you can see I'm getting closer. I'm down a little bit more than I should be. So we're going to move it up just a tidge, and I should be good. Okay, you could also measure with your ruler 1/4 inch if you wanted to do that, but I like to just kind of eyeball it, and I don't mind pinning and unpinning a little bit. It's not a big deal. Okay, that's looking much better, okay? And again, I've got, this isn't perfect, so, okay, that looks good. So at this point in time, what I can do, I do not like to stitch with my pins parallel to my fabric, because it's too easy to run over them and too hard to pull them out to avoid that. So you can either clip or pin this in place. And then I'm going to go back to the machine and I'm going to stitch this on with a 1/4 inch seam, come back and show you what to do next. Now that I have stitched on the remaining part of my background fabric, I need to press and get it to lie nice and flat. All right, so there we go, that's pretty good. So the next thing I need to do is do a little bit more trimming before I add our second strip of crumb fabric. So let me just line this up here and get this nice and straight. All right, and if I need to do any trimming at the other side, you know, it might need to be a little bit of trimming there. Let's just see here where we're at. A little bit. Let's trim that off too. Alrighty. Okay, so there we go. We've got one crumb strip inserted. Yay! Guess what? Time for a second one, right? All right. So this time I'm going to turn my block this way and I want to insert this strip, you know, somehow here, right? Do I want to, I probably want it on a different angle than this one. So something like this would be nice, I think. Let's try something like that. Making sure I'm in, you know, from both my edges there. Okay. Doesn't it seem weird to just make one block to cut it in half? That's going to get more interesting though. It's good. All right. So again, same process. I'm going to put this in, making sure that it extends on both sides, right? I'm going to line up my other part of the block when I come back and stitch it together, but it's going to be a little different here. It's actually not here we're looking at. It's going to be here we're looking at. So I want this strip to look like it is going all the way through nice and even. So I'm going to show you how to do that after I sew this on and press it open. Now we are almost done the block. We have to add our last piece of background fabric and crumb strip to this one. And we're going to do this a little differently because what we want to do now is we want to make sure that this strip is going all the way through and looking like it joins up, right? It's kind of an optical illusion, right? So in order to do that, what I want to do is I want to take a pin and I want to line it up with this, the edge, I should say, of the crumb strip. Apparently I can't pin and talk at the same time. Okay, so I've got it on there. And then what I want to do is I want to take this, of course we're going to be stitching it right sides together, right? So what I want to do is I want to line up the seam allowance with that pin. Okay, so I'm not lining up the edge of the fabric with the pin, I'm lining up my seam allowance where the stitching is, all right? Again, if we want to check to make sure we're doing okay here before we commit ourselves by stitching it all together, we could pin at roughly 1/4 inch here to mimic that 1/4 inch seam allowance and then open it up and see what it looks like. All right, take that pin out for a second. So that looks like it's down just a tidge. Okay, so I can move it up just a little bit, and that's probably going to be good enough. All right. Doesn't have to be perfect, right? Perfect-ish is perfectly fine. So let us pin, and then it's time to go to the sewing machine and stitch this on with a 1/4 inch seam, and then I'll come back and show you what we've got. Now, this is our final block. Well, not really, okay, because I still have to do some trimming, but I've got the background all sewn back on, right? So we've inserted this block, this strip, I should say, first and cut into it, and then inserted this one, so that's my second one. And you can see that this lines up really nicely, so it looks really cool, right? Not that hard to do, but it's kind of impressive, right? Now, you can see though that I've got some excess sticking out here, and we're off just a little bit here, which was what will happen when you are making this type of a block. So I want to do some trimming, right? So let's do some trimming. Let's line this up here. Let's trim this side here. I'm just going to trim, actually I need to move it over a little bit. So you want to take the shortest side, if you will, and line that up against the line on your cutting mat, or with the line on your cutting mat, I should say. And then we're going to trim. So you're going to be cutting off some of the background here. That's okay. It's kind of the nature of the beast. All right. So, and I need to do the same thing over here. So let's find that short part again here. Move this up a bit so you can see better. Okay, that's kind of the shortest part there. Making sure we're square. We're going to cut off this excess. All right. Okay. So I could take this off, I could keep this for some more crumb fabric, another project if I want to. So here's our block. Now at this point in time, you may want to trim this down even more to a specific size. Maybe you're doing an improv project and you don't care what the size of your blocks are. That is up to you, all right? But that's the look you're going to get from doing this slash and insert when you're using crumb fabric. Now, I've got some tips for you, but before I get into those, I wanted to say a big thank you and a shout out to my Patchwork Pals. Those are people who are in my Patchwork Pals YouTube membership. And for a small monthly fee, they not only help to support my Chatterbox Quilts YouTube channel, but they also get lots of great perks, including early access to all my videos. So if you are interested in becoming a Patchwork Pal and you'd like to support my YouTube channel, click on the join button below any of my videos. You can get all the details and even join us today. So, tips. I've got a few of them for you, all right? First tip, when you're working with the crumb fabric and you're working with a background fabric, make sure that your background fabric is solid or solidish. You can see here I'm working with a white solid. I could be working with a blender, like a tone on tone. That would work fine. But the reason I'm saying that is because you've got a lot of different fabrics going on in the crumb strips that you're going to insert. If you had a patterned background, it's not going to look very good. You're not really going to see these inserts at all. You're going to lose the effect of the block. So making sure that you have a solid or solidish background square is tip number one. Tip number two is how you work with your crumb fabrics. So you may have noticed that I was rather selective in the fabrics I put into these crumb strips. So I actually made these strips for this block, and I've got like all yellow or yellowish fabrics here and all blues, greens here. You could do it like that, going in one colorway, or if you wanted to, you could just add any color fabrics together to get a really scrappy look. So that's tip number two. Consider what you want to put into your crumb fabric strips. Now, tip number three, and I kind of talked about this a little earlier, is the fact that if you are going to be adding in, especially if you're going to be adding in more than just two of these strips, if you want to add in 3 or 4, every time you do that, it kind of wonks things up, right? So you may find that your block becomes much smaller when you go to trim it at the end. So if you want to do that, make sure you start with a good size background square of fabric. All right, make sure it's at least 2 inches wider, both ways actually, bigger than what you want your finished block to be, because you're going to be doing more and more trimming down. So make sure you make that background block nice and big. Now the fourth tip I want to share with you has to do with the width of the crumb fabric strips. All right, so if we look at this block here that we just created and we look at this one here, you can see that the strip here is much wider than this one. This one, they are almost the same. This one's a tad wider, but you can see the noticeable difference here on these ones when you compare them. And so the wider your strip gets, the more wonky your block is going to be. All right, so you can see in this particular one the difference here and also here, much more so than when I trimmed this block. So if you go with these wider strips, you're going to see that your block is going to get more distorted, more askew, and you're going to lose more of the block when you go to trim it down. All right, so you can see the difference in that. So now you know how to do a slash and insert block with crumb fabric strips. But you might be wondering, what else can I do with crumb fabric? Well, don't worry, I got you covered. Check out this video that has all the helpful information that you'll need. And for more helpful quilting information, be sure to go to my website at www.chatterboxquilts.com.